You know, I've done a lot of standalone gun reviews here on the channel over the past 10 years, but I've done even more comparisons to other guns. And that's something I've always tried to do to separate myself from some other creators is I will take a gun and I will compare it to other similar guns and keep that gun in the conversation. Sometimes a gun stands out so much to me that I will compare it to every other similar or dissimilar gun in my lineup. And one thing I'm not afraid to do either is tell you exactly what I like or don't like about a particular gun, whether that's pistols, rifles, PDWs, PCCs, or anything else. But sometimes there are some guns that kind of fall through the cracks. Whether those are guns that I temporarily get my hands on, that are borrowed, that I end up giving back. Maybe I sold it because I wasn't that impressed, and then I will try to re-review it and see if my opinion changes. And then there's others, like the Walther PDP, that simply have sat in the safe for years, and I haven't really done a whole lot with them since. And that's why I decided to take this thing out of the safe and get it back to the range and see what my opinion is all of these years later. And maybe I'm giving a little bit too much too soon, but I want to tell you why I believe this is the best pistol I honestly forgot existed. And of course, if you want to check out my initial review that I did years ago, you can check that right here on the channel. If you like what I do, consider subscribing, hit your notifications so you never miss one from me. Also love to have you guys join the SHOT team right here on YouTube or over on Patreon. Let's go and get into it. Now we're talking about a company that actually started with rifles and air rifles, target rifles actually, in 1886, and they didn't make their first pistol until like 1908. And so their very first 9mm was the Model 6, which was very unsuccessful, blowback design, only 1,000 or so were made. But this company has continued to evolve and make some of the best pistols on the market, starting with the Walther PP in 1929, which was the first successful double to single action unlocked breech gun that was ever produced, right? It had a fixed barrel. The barrel acted like the guide rod, so that barrel was stationary, super accurate, and very concealable. And everybody from James Bond to Adolf Hitler carried a Walther PP. Of course, the PPK was another gun, and then the P38, which served, or was the main sidearm of the Wehrmacht through World War II. And then, of course, in 1957, that's when they restarted production on the P38 for the Bundeswehr, or the West German Army. And then in 1999 or 2000, one of the two, they actually started importing guns, or Smith & Wesson actually served as their importer. And of course, we had the Walther 99, and then the original PPS, which was one of the first polymer frame striker fire concealed carry guns, and then the Walther PPS M2, which was one of the best single stacks for its day as far as concealed carry and shootability. That thing was absolutely fantastic. It's a gun that I continue to rave about still to this day. So pistols are Walther's thing, and although I'd love to see them come out with a rifle because they've made some really cool rifles in their history, still they know how to do pistols. And so one thing that they did with the Walther lineup and the PDP specifically is they kept the things that worked really well in the PPQ, but they also made some changes to make sure that they kept up with the times, and this line has expanded ever since, which I'll talk about a little bit too. One of the first changes they made was in their slide serrations, and so now we have these serrations that are fairly widely spread apart, but they're super aggressive, and so they give a really good bite on the slide itself. Now, if this is a little bit too much spring pressure for you, they also make the PDP F version, which is their female lineup, but honestly it can work for anybody with smaller hands or weaker dexterity in your hands, whether that's arthritis or any number of issues, carpal tunnel. And that spring is going to be a lot less pressure. They actually use a two-piece striker on the new F series in order to lower some of that force needed to rack the slide. But this one, super aggressive serrations. That's one upgrade they made to this gun. Another thing that they did here is they weren't necessarily ahead of everybody else in creating a pistol and making sure that it can accommodate a red dot, but they were definitely right there when it started to really boom. You know, now every manufacturer puts a red dot or makes their guns red dot capable or red dot ready, and Walther for sure did not want to miss that boat, because that is something that I know some people said, hey, it's never really going to take off. But you know, you got to think Trijicon made their first RMR, or started selling their first RMR in like 2009. So they were super forward thinking when it came to the whole micro red dot for your pistols. And so while Walther wasn't the first, they were definitely right there. That was 3 years ago when they first came out with this pistol. So they made it red dot capable. The sights on this gun are one that they've always left a little bit to be desired. And while the 3-sight setup is a decent setup, and of course they are adjustable, they just sit really low to the slide. I'd rather see the sights actually be able to co-witness with a red dot, but that's something that a lot of companies don't do. One thing they have done though, since I reviewed this gun, is they have come out with an entire lineup. Some of these guns straight from the factory with the Aimpoint Acro. And with as good as red dot technology is now, I'm not saying that you don't need a backup as far as iron sights, but with the battery technology and the way these things are, they last for a really long time. So, having to worry about battery swaps and stuff is not as frequent as it has been in the past. And of course, they have their pro models, they have their threaded models, they have their compacts, their full size, and all of that too. Another thing they have is an ambidextrous gun. Now, it's not fully ambidextrous as far as the magazine release, but it can be swapped, and it's also protected there, so you're not going to inadvertently hit that. They also have the slide stop, or release if you want to use it like that, is located in pretty much the perfect spot, and it's big enough to manipulate. Some companies make their slide stops so small and inconspicuous that it makes it harder than what it necessarily needs to be in order to actuate that, whether you're using it as a stop or as a release. So Walther has that part of it figured out perfectly. It's the same on both sides. It's rugged. It works really well. Of course, we have a standard rail squared off trigger guard. We're going to talk about the trigger here in a minute, by the way. But one thing that I missed when I did this review back in the day, not only do we have backstrap options, of course, but we also have this updated grip texturing. Now, the grip texturing on the PPQ was fantastic. It was a little less subtle, though. So I don't want to call it smooth. It offered a decent grip, but this is much better than what you're going to find on the PPQ, and honestly much better than what you'll find on a lot of pistols, because while it is somewhat aggressive and you run your hands over it and you're like, oh man, that's got some really good pressure to it, it's not until you actually really bite down on the gun where you really start to appreciate that. Or once you start shooting it, you can really appreciate how the gun just bites into your hand. It's not overly aggressive. It's not like the M2.0s from Smith & Wesson when those first came out, just super overly aggressive. This is almost the perfect balance. Another thing I'm not typically a fan of is they have these slight finger grooves, but again, with the curvature of that back strap and the way this gun points and shoots, it's fantastic. Now, I didn't miss that part in my initial review. I knew that. I was like, man, this thing feels really good. What I did miss is this little curve down at the bottom. So what they did, Larry Vickers actually has a video on all of these features with the Walther PDP, is they put a little bit more curve into it. And so if you think about it, when you're going to put pressure on the gun, you're obviously going to have pressure from your pinky too, and that pinky, I'm exaggerating this, but that pinky is going to drop the gun down just a little bit, and that's going to line up your red dot perfectly. Now, I shot this this past time when we took it back out without a red dot. I was like, hey, I'll just use the iron sights, no problem. And one thing about it, even with the iron sights, as soon as I present the gun, those sights are right there on target. So regardless, whether you're using this with or without an optic, one thing I can tell you is the gun points really well. There's other guns that point this well. The M&P is one of them, but this gun points just as good as any other that I've put in my hand. And of course, this one comes with two 15-round magazines. Another thing, super easy to break down, right? Boom, there you go. Quality components, what you would expect from Walther. They have a polymer guide rod. No issues ever with this gun that I can remember anyways. And then of course, you know, for a what they call a compact gun, you know, Glock does the same thing with their Glock 19. It's kind of small full size, but compact maybe in their model, right, compared to the other ones. But one thing they do really well too, even though it's got a fairly wide appearance to it, it's like 1.3 inches wide, so a little bit thicker than some of the other guns out there, but we don't have a problem with thick here on the channel. We like thick, right? Thick is sometimes really good. Actually, a lot of times it's really good. When it comes to deep concealment, and for some people, thick ain't always the answer. But again, we don't mind thick here on the Heckshot 87 channel. One thing about this one though, I've never considered this like a deep concealment gun. I consider this to be more of a duty gun, training gun, home defense type of pistol. That's just for me personally. I don't carry guns typically this big, but this one's 21.5 ounces or 21.5 ounces without a magazine. So considering the size of the gun, which I think it's pretty much the perfect size do-it-all pistol, they actually nailed the weight. You would think it actually weighs more considering the aesthetics of it and the width of the slide, but they actually were able to keep that weight down. And the last thing that I want to talk about, and something that they retained from the PPQ and actually refined from the PPQ, which I didn't really think was possible, is the trigger. So again, that PPQ trigger back in the day was just absolutely incredible, man. I mean, it really was. And one thing they do really well is they don't give it too much travel, right? You have a little bit of a hook trigger, and they have some different trigger designs now with their newer guns, but you have a little bit of a hook trigger to this one. You hit that wall and it breaks. Just a little bit of creep in that trigger, reset, breaks. It does not have to be super light. It just needs to be clean and predictable, and that's what they do. And it translates at the range. When you look at my hand and my placement, this thing is almost perfectly sized. The trigger is incredible. It points really well. Everything about the gun is almost perfect. The only thing that bothers me is the fact I have not tried the Q4 or Q5 match frame guns, the steel frame versions of those guns, and I honestly don't have a good excuse for why. They have the pro models. I haven't tried those out. So I think it might be time to reach back out to Walther and see if we can get another one of those to review. The biggest thing that bothers me with Walther, with all their storied history, and I've covered a lot of that in the past, is that they still haven't come out with a 10 to 12 round plus version of the PPS, a new updated version. And that's something I have asked about, and I really wish that they would come out with something. Hell, I would help them create something, because that, again, the original PPS was good. The PPS M2 was incredible. It's just dated now, so we need an update to that gun. I'd really love to see that. Hopefully eventually they will come out with that. I don't know if they think that they've missed the mark, but if it's anything like the PPS M2, just updated with some little bit better features, better trigger, this type of trigger, and more capacity, I think they would still have a winner. But there you go. Walther's one of those companies I've talked a lot about, you know, pistols and guns they've made during World War II, probably more so than their modern guns, but their modern guns are just as fantastic. Do I wish they would make a rifle, make an updated concealed carry gun, and do some more things? Absolutely. But hey, that's just my opinion. And of course, I'd love to hear yours, man. What is a gun that you have in your safe that you totally forgot about, that you think is just awesome, and maybe you brought it out and you're like, dude, this thing is great? Or maybe, hey, what do you think about the Walther PDP or the F version of this gun? If you like what I do here, consider subscribing and turn on your notifications so you never miss a video from me. I'd also love to have you guys join the SHOT Team either here or over on Patreon. Big thanks, see you in the next one, and as always, hold it down.